NGOs. You've heard of them. You've probably even donated to one. We tend to think of them as a magic bullet for the world's biggest problems. But what if that's not the whole story? What if we looked at them not just as charities, but as businesses driven by powerful economic incentives? Well, that's where things get really interesting. Let's dig in.
So let's start here. This quote paints a really vivid picture, right? A refugee settlement in Uganda, thousands of people, and their well-being rests in the hands of a few NGOs. This is the image we all have in our minds, dedicated people doing critical, life-saving work on the ground. And it's absolutely true. They're in countless places just like this, providing help and hope every single day.
And it's that powerful image that's created this idea of the NGO as a sort of magic bullet, the perfect, purely good solution for things like poverty and suffering.
So, just so we're all on the same page, what exactly is an NGO? Well, according to the World Bank, it's a private organization that's all about humanitarian goals, not commercial ones. Think relieving suffering, helping the poor, protecting the environment. You get the idea.
This magic bullet idea really took hold. People started seeing NGOs as the favorite child of the development world. You know, they could get things done without being tangled up in politics or driven by profit. The ideal was that they were just better, more efficient, more committed, and better at delivering help where governments couldn't or wouldn't.
Okay, but what happens when we pop the hood and take a look at the engine that's actually driving all this? This is where the simple story of pure altruism gets a whole lot more complicated.
The stated mission is, of course, absolutely noble, to relieve suffering. No one's debating that. But the structure of how they do it creates this powerful and often invisible set of incentives that can pull them in some pretty surprising directions.
And this right here, this reframes the whole conversation. Instead of a charity, think of an NGO as a not-for-profit contractor. Now, why does that matter? Because for the services they provide, like education or healthcare in a remote village, it's incredibly hard to verify the quality. So what happens? The incentive shifts to focusing on the one thing that can be measured, keeping the donors happy.
Which, leads us to this pretty fundamental question. If your entire organization's survival depends on donor money, who is your real customer? Is it the people you're there to help, or is it the people who write the checks?
And here's the core problem in a nutshell. In a normal market, if you get bad service, you just go somewhere else, right? You penalize the bad provider. But the beneficiaries of aid, they can't do that. The only real market force here is the donation itself. So job number one becomes managing the satisfaction of the donor, not necessarily the well-being of the recipient.
Now, once you start seeing NGOs through this contractor lens, their absolutely massive growth over the last few decades starts to make a lot more sense. It's been called a quiet revolution, and the scale of it is just wow.
To get a feel for this, let's do a little time travel. Back in the mid-1950s, there were fewer than 1,000 international NGOs in the whole world. A decent number, sure, but nothing like what we see today.
Now, fast forward to today, that number has exploded to over 20,000. That's a 20-fold increase. It's an unbelievable rate of growth that has totally transformed the world of international aid.
I mean, just look at this chart. That is not slow and steady growth. That's a hockey stick. The curve just takes off, especially in the last few decades, as governments started to essentially outsource more and more of their aid work to these organizations.
And all this growth is being fueled by a really diverse mix of money. Yeah, government funding is a big piece of the pie, but NGOs have become absolute masters at fundraising. They're balancing government contracts with private donations, huge in-kind contributions, we're talking food, medicine, and even generating their own revenue.
Okay, so we've got this massive, well-funded global industry, which leads us to the single most important question you can possibly ask. After all this time and all this money, does it actually work?
When you step back and look at the whole system, all the players, all the money, what can we say for sure about the actual, proven collective impact? You'd think the answer would be clear, but the answer from a huge survey by the OECD is, well, it's pretty shocking. Despite all the individual success stories we hear, there's a startling lack of firm, reliable evidence on the overall impact of the entire sector. So why is that? It's not one single thing. It's systemic. First, an NGO has basically zero incentive to broadcast its failures. I mean, would you? Second, the government agencies that fund them don't want to admit they backed a dud either. And finally, because we all have such a positive view of NGOs, there's just not a lot of public pressure to do the kind of tough, rigorous evaluation you demand in other fields.
All of this brings us to a really fascinating and honestly provocative idea. If the current model has all these built-in challenges, could there be a better way to structure how we help people?
So let's quickly recap the big systemic issues. You've got too many cooks in the kitchen, making coordination a nightmare. You've got too many layers of administration, with each one taking a cut. And maybe most important, the whole system is kind of built on this idea that some donor, thousands of miles away, knows what's best for a community.
So here's an alternative idea that's being tried out: aid vouchers. The way it works is actually pretty simple. Instead of giving money to the NGO, you give vouchers directly to the people who need help. They then get to purchase services from whichever NGO they think is doing the best job. Then the NGOs redeem those vouchers to get their funding.
And that's the real game changer. It completely flips the script. All of a sudden, the decision-making power isn't with a distant donor anymore. It's in the hands of the people the system is actually supposed to be helping. It creates competition, it creates choice, and it creates accountability.
Which leaves us with this final, really challenging thought. We're so used to thinking of charity and aid as being totally separate from the market. But what if the most powerful way to help is to harness market forces? Not forces driven by donors, but by the choices and the power of the poor themselves. Something to think about.